Retro.
Hey, this is Catherine Tabor, Senator Padme Amidala from Star Wars The Clone Wars, and you're listening to Jay and Dennis on Podcast Stardust. Stay on the light side.
Welcome to Podcast Stardust. This is the fully armed and operational podcast dedicated to Star Wars news, reviews, and discussion. I'm Dennis Keithley.
And I'm Jay Krebs.
And we have the penultimate episode of Skeleton Crew on deck for this episode. But before we get into that, Jay, please remind everybody what our social media contacts are.
Absolutely. We are on Facebook and Instagram conveniently at Podcast Stardust.
All right. The digital line. The signal's boosted to maximum output. The shield is down. We are now broadcasting to the galaxy. Probably should have thrown something in there about getting through the barrier, but next week.
We have one more chance.
All right. And so again, this is our discussion of episode 7, which is called We're Going to Be in So Much Trouble, continuing their trend of naming the episode after a line from the show, which is really quite endearing, if I'm being honest. So we're going to go ahead and do our usual non-spoiler thoughts on this, which will be for the next few minutes. And that way, if you haven't seen it yet, you won't get spoiled. Jay, what'd you think about this one?
Well, first of all, I have to say, I can't believe we're already looking down the barrel of the last episode. And just as much as we've been looking forward to this here, we do this all the time, with these series and everything, that it's like, oh my gosh, now it's almost to the end. I thought that this one did a fantastic job of setting us up for whatever's to come in this finale. And there's so many things, and you put a lot of these in the notes, actually, as I was reading through here, that I thought, ooh, there's a reference to this. There's a reference to that. This was very clever. That was very clever. And then there was also some things that made me kind of cringe a little bit in terms of, oh my gosh, they're going there with this.
Yeah.
Really? And so I thought it was a brilliant episode and a great way to set up this finale, and just leaving us on the edge of our seat, just wanting more.
I hear you. I cannot believe how consistently good the show has been on a week-to-week basis. I think was episode 4 maybe that I gave like a B+ to, and all the rest of them are at least some version of an A. And now going back and thinking about it, that episode I think really needs to be categorized as no worse than an A- on it. And that just makes me nervous for the finale. It's like, how do you end this fabulous run you've had on this series? I polled my wife and kids after we watched this episode last night. I was like, okay, we haven't seen the entire series, and I realize we're living in the moment and we've got some recency bias here. But, where does this Skeleton Crew rank in the Disney Plus series of shows? And it came down to this for The Mandalorian, when it's all said and done. And I absolutely stand by that. As much as I liked Ahsoka and I liked Obi-Wan Kenobi and Andor and everything else, it's just been so consistently fun on a week-to-week basis that I haven't left a single episode ever feeling let down on this. And this week's episode was no different on it. I mean, yeah, there's stuff that made you cringe, but they sold it.
Way. Yes.
Yeah, they absolutely sold it here. And, again, it's hard to have a non-spoiler discussion and knowing where to draw the line. But just the stuff they did with Jod in this episode, the world building they've done around At Attin, continuing to flesh out what that's all about and everything there. The pirates here, again, getting into a little bit more, I don't want to say necessarily their lore, but further developing the notion of their code that they did in this episode. It's just one outstanding thing on top of another when it comes down to it. And this has got to come back for a second season. It is so ripe for more adventures for these kids. And I know they've got ideas should they want to do it, but they absolutely need to.
Oh, I totally agree. And I'm right there with you too as far as the ranking goes. And I guess sitting here thinking about it, yeah, you're absolutely right. I mean, it is right up there with The Mandalorian because it's just good, clean fun. It's very smart storytelling in the way that it is so seamless with keeping us engaged from week to week, but not in a way that is cheesy and when I say cringy, I don't mean that in a bad way. It makes you cringe in all the right ways.
Sure.
And I just feel like there's just been so much that's gone on with this. It's just such a wonderful fresh breath of air. And I'm just like you. I know that there's other places that they could go with this. So I can't wait to see where this series ends up. And like you, I'm kind of hoping that we don't not that we're going to get let down in the finale, but just like with anybody that watches Game of Thrones, the season before the finale season was so much better than the finale
Oh yeah.
season. So it's kind of like one of those things like it's build up, build up, build up that I hope that we just don't go, like it fizzles.
It
So,
just
but
needs a
I don't
stick
think it will.
landing.
Yeah.
Right.
I don't think it
And so
will. Yeah. It'll
yeah.
stick that landing.
Yeah, I think it's heading in the right direction, and they got so many
Mhm.
great things they can possibilities so that they can do with that last episode. So
Mhm.
there
Mhm.
you go. 2 more
Yeah,
thumbs up from Dennis and Jay here on Podcast Stardust. So if you
absolutely.
don't want any spoiled, now's the time to abandon ship, and we're going to carry on with the more detailed discussion of the conversation. So you've been warned.
Nice
Um,
usage.
yeah. So Jay, I try not to structure our conversations where it's just us going like moment by moment through the episode, and but that seems to be what happens all the time. And I'm going to try not to do that so much with this one. And I'll kind of talk about some topical things. First off, though, the episode does start with the parents meeting in the woods, trying to get the message out to them that they've been talking about, going through this illicit means of doing so. And I'm assuming you caught the same vibe I did. It was so much like ET setting up his
Yes.
communication device to phone home there.
Uh-huh.
And, only to get caught by the security droids, who are announcing you have an unauthorized communication device. You'll be stunned for your own safety. That's just okay. That's just a
For your
um,
own safety.
yeah, for your own
Saving you from
safety.
yourself.
Yeah, do not leave or you will be stunned or whatever. And so the parents have the sequence where they're all running away with the device in the hopes of being able to get away and then launch it so that they can get their message out to the kids. And it just so reminded me of the end of Avengers Endgame when they're trying to get the gauntlet with all the Infinity Stones away from Thanos, how they just kept handing it
Oh,
off from hero to hero.
good call.
Yeah. And that's not unique to Avengers Endgame. That was just the most recent instance of that type of a sequence that I could think of.
Mhm. Yeah, it's like playing rugby or something, just passing the ball. I did think it was I don't know what the word is, but when they were each of the parents after they'd been stunned, they kind of like you could see they were desperate to hold out the communication device and not fall with it so that the next
Mhm.
person could grab it from them. That it was very balletic in that way.
Yeah. And then it was Farah who was the last one to have it, and that was able to send it off for the kids. And so while we're on the subject of this device, it gets intercepted by the pirates later in this episode, and they're playing the transmission, and the kids are been held captive at this point, but they all kind of like look forward and listen to the message from their parents. That was such an endearing moment on
It
all of that.
was.
And perhaps the two highlights, well, no, they were all highlights, just the way they were talking to him. First off, Neil's species, his father had tusks. I love
Yeah,
that little detail. They're
I know.
really, really leaning into the elephant nature of their species. And then we had KB's moms just, you could hear the desperation in their voice, how concerned they were with their daughter because she hasn't had an ability to have the maintenance that she needs. And of course,
Mhm.
we just learned about how that important that was. Farah, pleading with Fern, you're not going to be in trouble. Of course, later she says, she's lying. We're going to be in so much trouble, which is where the title of the episode comes. But then I think the ultimate moment of all that was Wendell, saying to Wim, he's like, I'm sorry I didn't listen to you. Please just come home.
Yes.
And as a parent,
Yeah.
that was just so heartbreaking.
I agree. I agree. And I have to say that watching that also reminded me of Jin watching the hologram of her dad, even
Oh,
though it
good
was,
call.
you know what I mean? Even though it was
Yeah.
he was not with her anymore that she knew of. He was still alive, but didn't know where he was or anything like that. But it was because that speech gets me every time from Rogue One.
Yeah.
But that's immediately what I thought of when like each of the parents was coming up and the kids were watching this because it's the same kind of feel.
Yeah. Yeah. You know, you're absolutely right. That's a good call. I hadn't thought of that, but you nailed it with that. And then, this gets topped by the reunion when they get to the vault at the end of the episode, right
Mhm.
before Jod comes out and pulls his lightsaber on all of them.
Yeah.
The kids were up on the ship, and the parents were brought in on a skiff by the droids, and you could just see the reunions there. KB and her mom's in there fawning all over her, and like relieved to see that she's in such good shape. And then Numa, Neil's mom, picks him up and gives him a big hug. And Fern and Farah, Fern doesn't even try to turn her jacket back to the right way. She just is
Mhm.
herself in that moment, and her mom doesn't say anything
Mhm.
about it. And then Wendell picks Wim up in that huge hug. It's just kind of sometimes it takes something like that to, realize you've been taking things for granted.
Mhm.
And, you can see the relief in everybody's, in their voice and their expressions. That was such a really well done reunion scene.
It was very touching, and even though there was a little hesitation there between Wim and Wendell, I mean, they just ended up just melting, and that was so touching. It really was.
Yeah, and I think the hesitation was all on Wim's part because he didn't
Mhm.
know what his dad was gonna do, but Wendell just came in, lifted him up off the ground,
Yep.
and
Yep.
brought him in for the hug. Okay, so let's talk a bit about At Attin here. When the pirates get there first, and when they get there, all they see is this like gas giant of a planet that's just this big toxic maelstrom. And Brutus is like, you're crazy? You've led us astray. We can't go in there, we'll get destroyed. And I guess I think I know how I lean on this, and it's probably not much of a debate, but Jod, he's like, Brutus, are you blind? You're just believing whatever's right in front of your face. You're so stupid. I think is actually what he says there. Do you think Jod believed it, or he was just desperate at that point?
I think it was a little bit of both. There was a desperate hope there that
Uh-huh.
he was right about this, but there was also some doubt maybe in his mind. But I mean, Jod, he has a silver tongue. You know what I mean? He
Mhm.
can talk his way out of a cardboard box, if he had to. But so I think there was a little bit of both of those. But what did you think?
No, I think you're right. It was he really believed it. He's the one that's traveled to all these planets. He's seen the coordinates. They got them from Takranad. He knew this was the place. He's the one that's had all the experience, and he's been fighting for his life. And if anything, it was he's desperate because it wasn't as easy a sell as it should have been when they got
Mhm.
there. They had the coordinates
Mm,
that should be
mhm.
at, and they're there, but he had to be more convincing yet again because he almost got flushed out of the airlock of all
Right.
this.
Yeah.
So, but then he volunteers to take a fighter into it to prove it, but then Brutus refuses, and they send one of the Corrin in there, and a fighter, Gerb or something like that, I think was his name, who doesn't make it far at all. And then that's when the Onyx Cinder shows up, and
Mhm.
John's pretty smart. He figures it out that that's the key to getting to At Attin is that that ship. They need to capture it, so they do. So we get a nice little A New Hope reference with ships constantly being the Millennium Falcon getting captured by a tractor beam, and the Tantive 4 being pulled in by one,
Oh
and
yeah.
such
Mhm.
as they capture the Onyx Cinder. Lots of callbacks to either Star Wars stuff or classic '80s stuff in this episode
Oh yeah, there
with this one.
definitely was. Yeah, for sure. And so the whole thing too with Jod, one thing I didn't understand though is, obviously later he breaks his own shackles with the force. Like why wouldn't he, we talked about him not using the force as an outward type of a power play before, but I mean, he was obviously in the airlock and just about getting ready to be, evacuated into space. Why didn't he use it before that? I mean, that's a pretty tough time to not want to use that when
Yeah,
you
that's a
gotta
good
go to
question.
sleep,
I don't
you
know. I
know?
mean, we've seen him use the Force to turn off the lights on the ship.
Yeah.
Is him using the Force to open the airlock again just gonna result in them shoving him back in and closing the airlock and flushing him out immediately? I don't know.
Mhm,
I don't know what he's at that point, he's in the moment. He's desperate. He's seconds away from death, if that.
mhm.
So, yeah, and it's a plot point. So, yeah, I don't know what else,
Sure.
the Reese would have been there. One other thing I'll note is that the fighter, the call sign of the pilot on that was Ravager 1. And we were just talking, I think it was last week, about how with this whole getting flushed out the airlock reminded us of Guardians of the Galaxy 2, where the Ravagers were throwing people out the
Yes.
airlock, and now we got them
Uh-huh.
using that call sign here. So,
Yep, yep. Oh my
yeah,
gosh, I wonder if that is some kind of a reference to that.
yeah. But it turns out that with At Attin, the fact that it is the home of the Republic Mint is something that the adult population knows, but they don't tell their kids until graduation.
Yeah.
Why?
And well, okay, so here's the thing, I was trying to place this. I feel like that there's another set of stories where something like this is the case, that you have to be so old or you have to have reached some point in your life before you're allowed to know the certain piece of information. And
Uh-huh.
and I could not think of it. So I was hoping maybe as we talk this out that you knew of a reference like that because that sounds so familiar to me and I can't place it.
Well, there's plenty of instances where, graduation in a way is its own form of initiation into,
Sure.
a post school, an adult type of life. And then there's certain things and certain wisdom that's imparted upon you, yada, yada, when that happens. And so we've seen that. But I guess, I mean, it's important to the plot, and it's the explanation about why the kids didn't know that their planet was a secret, that, that they weren't aware of what was going on in the greater galaxy around them, don't have any knowledge of the war between the Empire and the rebellion. But what, how could they possibly anticipate it? And I'm not saying this was the reason, but why would you keep this knowledge from your children? To what are you trying to protect against? Because they can't communicate off world anyway. There's no one for them to tell. The fact that
Mhm.
the kids found this ship and managed to escape from Manhattan is pure happenstance. Because clearly nobody knew that ship was there. They had no reason to believe that any of these kids were going to get off planet and they'd be able to tell anyone about their homeworld here.
Mhm.
So, if I'm giving this show any demerits, it's a minor one because this kind of seems like an unnecessary plot point. But well, it's necessary because the plot doesn't work without it. But it seems like an unnecessary thing for the people on this planet to do because the chances of their kids getting off world without them is so remote.
Right. Yeah, what are they actually protecting and why
Yeah.
what's the harm in them knowing sooner? Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. And I had another question too, and I don't know if you had any ideas on this, but the creation of this maelstrom, this tumultuous, gas that surrounds the planet was obviously being created by some sort of conduction unit because when that Corrin went through, he was the first one to perish from the lightning
Yeah.
bolts that came from it. So, I mean, we've talked about the fact that even Kim had talked about how these planets were hidden and they were hidden purposely.
Uh-huh.
So what is it that creates the maelstrom? What are these units and where did they come from? I mean, is this potentially a High Republic tie-in?
Yeah, I can't think of a High Republic reference that would match up with that, but that doesn't mean it isn't when it comes down to it. I mean, if the Empire can do things like Operation Cinder and turn the weather satellites on Naboo against it in order to try and
Mhm.
destroy that planet, and then what was the name of the other planet they just basically wasted from orbit? It would seem that the technology exists that they could use it to hide a planet. We just saw the Nile create a storm wall where people
Well,
couldn't get
that's
in
what I'm
or out.
referring to. Yeah, is this
Yeah.
like a
So
contained storm wall?
right, and
Mhm.
my understanding of the storm wall is that it's not a big gaseous wall looking thing. It's just that it's a barrier that disrupts travel through
Mhm.
that. But it doesn't matter, right? You get destroyed, you get destroyed.
Right.
Very good possibility that this is still a High Republic tie-in. I mean, we can use Old Republic credits all we want. That does not mean the Old Republic era. I mean, there is an Old Republic and a New Republic at this point. We're not
Mhm.
talking about the Old Republic like the 4,000 years ago necessarily Republic, just the previous version of the Republic. And so
Exactly.
it's kind of important not to get caught up in that, that word choice when it comes down to
Mhm.
it.
Mhm.
Um,
Mhm. Yeah, no,
but
that's completely understandable.
while we're on the subject of the barrier, that was extremely clever that the Onyx Cinder was not, in fact, a pirate ship, but a ship from At Attin that
Yes.
had the built-in clearance code device or whatever it is that allowed it to traverse the barrier, kind of like a path drive that the Nile used to get across the storm wall
Mhm.
in the High
Mhm.
Republic. So a lot of convenient similarities there.
Exactly. And because the only other, when they use the term maelstrom that I can think of is the maw that they had to go
Yeah.
through in the Kessel Run, you know? So this is a man-made maelstrom as opposed to the maw, but I mean it still has a lot of the same sorts of characteristics, save the gigantic creatures. They just have lightning bolts to deal with instead.
Uh-huh. And so, you know, um, at this point, Jod has snuck aboard the Onyx Cinder, and we'll get to how that happened in just a moment. But he takes the kids hostage, and I'm mainly focusing on the At-Attin part of this discussion here. And they get down there to the planet, and the supervisor comes on and announces that there is an emissary arriving for shipment. All non-essential people should take a break. Everyone who's essential should go back to work. And then it lands, and the ground splits, and it seems like the people there had no idea that they were standing in a landing platform at
Right.
all, because those panels start up and then they have to run off. And then once they land, they're approached by droids, and then the platform descends under the ground and it takes them to the vault, where there's 1,139, not
Yes.
1,138, but 1,139 other vaults full of these Old Republic credits. Again, I was talking about the world building in our non-spoiler portion of it here, but the adults all know that they're working for the Republic Mint, but they don't seem to know where that vault is.
Mhm.
And the whole thing's being kept a secret from them.
Yeah, it's so true. Yeah, as you were saying, they completely acted like they had no idea that this was opening up into something like this. But
Yeah.
yeah, that did not go unescaped to my notion, the 1139 instead of
Mhm.
1138.
But the other thing about this is that the supervisor, who is voiced by Stephen Fry, by the way, and so I have a very strong suspicion we're going to be seeing him in the next episode. He makes that announcement that's just kind of like non-essential people should stay out of the way,
Mhm.
and there are no people that are involved with the emissary's arrival. It's all droids here.
Yeah, yeah.
The droids are in control of this planet.
It seems to be. And then the more and more I think about it too, your reference to the Wizard of Oz, and this
Uh-huh.
wizard that's behind the curtain and so on and so forth. And we've been trying to figure out who the identity of the supervisor is. But Stephen Fry, I mean, he does mostly voice acting. I mean, he's done some,
Well,
you
he's
know,
got his career started as an actor and a comedian, and then
right.
he's considerably older now, so a lot of his recent work has been voice acting. But he's
Hmm.
showed up on a lot of television shows. Uh, he's pretty famous. He's Sir Stephen Fry. So I don't know. I don't think you get him just to record a few lines to be announced over a PA system on Ad Appen.
Right. Exactly. No, I totally agree with you on that one.
Yeah. So we'll got that to look forward in our final episode of the season.
Hmm.
All right, let's talk about Jod.
Huh.
Man, this is a guy who, I would he he made his heel turn just a couple episodes ago, But, he already started off as a villain. We knew him as Captain Silvo, the pirate leader from the first episode. But he just keeps, when you're talking about cringeworthy stuff, it's him all the way.
Oh, yeah.
I mean,
Yeah.
he kills Brutus in cold blood when Brutus tries to board the Onyx Center after the pirate frigate has tractored it into the landing bay. The kids trapped him with that claw that comes out of the landing platform. And then,
Clever, by the way.
yeah, it was. I don't think the kids were thinking John was going to shoot him in the head.
No, I didn't think Jod was gonna shoot him in the head.
Yeah, I mean, that's just cold-blooded murder right there.
Right. I mean, we've seen Jod do some cold-blooded things at the very beginning, as we've been referring to, but it seems like he's really softened the audience up to believe that he's got a heart. You know what I mean?
Right.
And he's because he has had some tender moments with the kids, but then in the blink of an eye, he can really turn on you. And, we've talked about the idea of these scoundrels before in Star Wars that, they really have a heart of gold and yada, yada, yada. And we kind of believe that about Jod, but I'm not thinking that anymore. He is ruthless.
No, he's absolutely ruthless. One of the notes I note here, and I'm sure you saw it, is that he's kind of a Sith light when it comes down to it. He can use the Force. He wears a helmet to disguise his identity like a Darth Vader or a Kylo Ren, and he
Hmm.
takes on different names.
Yes.
Silvo sounds much more like, he could be Darth. So I want to be very clear. I am not saying he is a Sith. He does not have the ambition to be a Sith. He is
No.
purely motivated by greed when it
Hmm.
comes down to it. He doesn't want power. He doesn't want to reform the galaxy. He doesn't want to impose his will on everybody. He wants money. He wants luxury. And that's what's motivating him. Is that
Right.
your take, or what do you think?
Oh yeah, no, totally. And I want to know what the heck happened to him to sour him so much on the galaxy at large, because obviously I don't know if he's had necessarily training, but I mean, he seemed to pick up that lightsaber and handle it pretty well, you know what I'm saying? But yeah, I just there's got to be something more to his story than what meets the eye, but I'm with you. There's no Sith motive at all involved in this. That ship didn't even come to port, let alone sail.
Well, I think the piece of dialogue for Jod that's very instructive in all this is when he is yelling at the kids after he's already pulled his lightsaber on them, like Anakin, and pulling it on the younglings in Revenge of the Sith.
Yeah.
And they're sitting there cowering up against the console. And, he just is like, I can't take all your insistent jabbering, jabber, jabber, jabber. I think it's the word he uses. And it's giving me a headache. And then he's insulting him. And he turns to him and says, and you're the worst. Poor boy. You're all weak, sheltered, spoiled children. That seemed almost like I don't know if it's a confessional, but it sounds like he's projecting
Mhm.
in a bit in that case. And, one of the things we've been talking about was like, well, was he a Jedi youngling that survived Order 66? That would make sense given this. He's kind of disgusted by them because he was, if let's assume this to be true, he was a Jedi youngling and all the Jedi died. And I'm thinking back to the prior line from an earlier episode, just like, I'm lost and alone, just like you, is what he says to those kids. He was, if he was that, and suddenly he had to make his own way in the galaxy, and he did it for years, and he survived with less than what these kids had, I could see him being resentful
Mhm.
in that case.
Yeah, no, I think projection or projecting is a perfect way to describe it. Because they always say that you can't hate something unless it reflects something about yourself. You know what I mean?
Uh-huh.
So it's yeah, I think it's kind of a character study in Jod that he says that.
Yeah, yeah, and like I said, you get this. He has. I'm not saying that you have to be an expert in order to be able to swing a lightsaber around and hurt somebody, but he seems to be comfortable with that as a
Yes.
weapon.
Mhm.
And so I don't know. I just feel like he's had to have some prior experience to this. It's funny because last week we were talking about Chekhov's lightsaber. We saw him
Mhm.
pick up one at the end of the prior episode. They never used it. Well, here it is. I don't know how he managed to keep it hidden from the pirates. but he did,
Yeah.
and he took off SM-33's head with it.
Yes, I was just gonna
I,
say that, and but poor SM, he or 33, whatever you wanna call him, Shmi,
uh
he has been dead so many times. He's like a cat. He's had 9 lives in these episodes. So, I don't know, this one might be his demise, final demise.
Yeah, I hope not. I
I
gotta
hope
feel like
not
he's gonna
too.
come back. I mean, he's just too popular a character to go out this way. I mean, and he's a droid. They could reattach his head and I'm sure repair him and fix him.
Sure.
I mean, 3PO got blown apart and then Chewbacca put him back together. So
Mhm. Good point.
SM-33 is in a whole lot less pieces than he was. So
That's true, good
something
point.
tells me they could fix him if they wanted to. And but I loved how SM-33 turned on Jod and the reasoning that he used to do so. Because when they are on the Onyx Cinder and Jod made that comment that it's, that's too bad it's my ship now. And SM-33, who's all about the code, he loves being a pirate. He loves the idea of it's his programming, but and then he points out, it's like, no, wait, you're already the captain of the frigate. You can't be the captain of more than one ship. And so, Wim and Fern jump right in there. Wim says, "Well, I claim this ship," and John's like, "No, I claim this ship. I claim the Onyx Cinder." And Fern jumps in, unclaims these.
Right?
I'm the captain. SM-33, get these pirates out of here. And John's response is like, "Well, that's not the way it works." And SM-33 is like, "No, it's not, but it's close enough." And so,
Exactly, and it's
that
so
was,
funny because you know that SM-33 was wanting to side with the kids
yeah,
the whole time, and so that was kind of his little loophole to be able to do it, but whoever knew that something could be claimed when with an unclaimsies in Star
yeah,
Wars.
yeah.
Oh,
This
that's too
this
good.
series is just so much fun, and I saw someone make a comment online. I wish I could remember who it was so that I could give them proper credit. But it's a coming of age story for all ages here. I mean,
Oh, yeah. That's a
it
good
takes
way to
us
put it.
back to all the movies that we liked in the 80s with references to so many of the Star Wars things that we've loved growing up and even more recent stuff. And then it's a great show for, younger generations on top of
Mhm,
it.
mhm.
And it doesn't get bogged down ever. You had the heart to heart talk between Wim and Jod a couple episodes ago, and it lasted for a minute or two, but it's not like it got dwelled on. The
Right.
closest we get to that, when the kids didn't realize that the pirates were going to intercept them, they're on the way home and they're all playing games in the corridors. But Wim is disappointed because it's the end of the adventure.
Mhm.
Things are going to go back to the way that they were, and he's still going to have to take the assessment test. But Fern, with her still childlike enthusiasm, is like, no, they don't have to. We could hide. We could land the ship in the forest and hide it, and we can come back to it at some point. And when was, and she said that, and this is kind of a trope of these type of shows, to try and cheer him up and say, no, things aren't going to change. We're friends now, whatever. But Wim was just like, no, it's not like that at all. We can't get away with that. But so he's a bit melancholy about the whole thing.
Mhm. But you know what? I think that that was a good choice because it really does help to ground what's going on into reality.
Oh
And as
yeah,
much as it was great to be able to see the kids, being kids and running through the ship, as you said, and playing these games and being so excited about their adventures. But then for Wim to be realistic about it, it really does make it that, like I said, that grounded feeling that makes it believable. And I just thought it was so cute how Neil was like, "Yeah, and I almost died every time, but it's
mhm.
still fun."
Still fun adventure. Yeah.
It's still
Well,
a fun
and the
adventure.
thing is that scene demonstrated the growth for Fern. How she kind of went from being this arrogant kid to someone who could accept someone like Wim and Neil there. And as many times as Wim has tried to cheer her up over this series, she finally reciprocates that for him.
Mhm. Mhm.
And she learned that in the prior episode with when Neil made it clear to her that you're capable of doing things that not everybody can do, and that doesn't make people any worse. And so she had to stop and think about it.
Right.
And so she come to that realization. And meanwhile, Wim has his own coming of age moment when he gets reunited with his dad. I think that was one of the biggest things that he was nervous about going home, is that even though he told Jod on the previous episode that he misses his dad, it's still every time he saw him with his dad, it was like he was getting reprimanded. right? I
Mhm.
mean, it was like, here's your lunch money. I'm not going to be around. You're going to do better in school, and you better get perfect on that score. And Wendell finally apologizes here, and then when they have that reunion, they could, Wendell demonstrated that unconditional love. He was just happy to have his son home, which I think was huge for Wim in that moment.
Oh, 100%. And, one more thing about Fern too to point out is that it struck me that when they were playing those games that she finally let her guard down and just was a kid.
Yeah,
Because the whole time, even before their adventures had started, with her racing down the road next to the bus with KB, and, she always had this scowl on her face, and she always, wanted to act like she was better than she was, or wanted to hide her fears, or whatever, and be this leader. She finally just let go, and she was just a kid. And that
yeah.
was beautiful to see. And, just real quickly, not to belabor the point more, but this goes all the way back to, one of the first things I said about this show, that I think it really is a great way to pass the baton to the younger generation and
Mhm.
introduce Star Wars in a way that is still Star Wars, but it's also it's just fun.
Indeed, indeed, indeed. Yeah. Any predictions for the finale?
Oh gosh, I'm still holding out for Hondo. I really hope that we're gonna get to see him, but obviously now that unless he happens to be, the supervisor, which I don't think he is, obviously, because it's not the right voice. But yeah, I don't know. I think, oof. I mean, I'm hoping that Jod's not going to commit any murders right there on the platform, but I'm not going to put it past him at this point. I mean, there might be a dismemberment or 2, but I think the supervisor is gonna show up, and it's gonna end up being someone that we didn't expect that it would be, or it's someone that, like Takranad, like you were saying before,
Yeah.
that could very potentially be that kind of person. But I really wanna get the answers to why has this been hidden, and who has hidden At Attin in all these other worlds? And I wanna see Kim again, but I don't know if that's gonna
Yeah.
happen either.
I'd like to see Kim too, but I don't know that we will. It would have been awesome to see Hondo in this series, but I think it would have had to happen like at a pirate base,
Yeah,
Port Borgo, whatever it was called, would have been the
yeah,
ideal place for that. And they just didn't go to enough other pirate haunts to make that happen. But
yeah.
hey, he could show up in the next season of
Good.
Skeleton Crew.
Yeah.
Would be fun.
What's your predictions?
Well, um, there's going to be some reveals about what's going on at why, because the parents directly confront the droids after they've been captured. In the aftermath of them trying to launch that little probe with the message past the barrier, they get interrupted. I think Farah or one of KB's mom says like, you droids only blah blah blah, and it's this clear delineation. And the droids are always the ones that are enforcing things. There's
Mhm.
the droids are the teachers in the
Mhm.
school. I mean,
Yeah.
they're in all the positions of authority for the most part, and there's going to be I feel like there's going to be some sort of reveal about that there's one person that's in control of the droids, and it's going to be the supervisor. Like you said, we're going to get to reveal the supervisor. uh, you know, I'm not 100% that it's Tack or not. I will not be the least bit surprised if it turns out to be him. But again, we've been describing it as this kind of Wizard of Oz type of mystery that they've set up here, the man
Mhm.
behind the curtain. And so, there'll be some sort of reveal about that. The pirates are going to get driven off. I wouldn't be surprised if the frigate finds some way to get past the barrier using the probe that the parents launched, because it had the technology to get past, because it contained whatever that device is that Numa smuggled to Wendell that he got caught with. So I'm anticipating that they'll use that to get the frigate past the barrier. So, the pirates are going to have to get fought off at some point. Wouldn't be surprised if SM-33 gets reactivated, and then, At Attin gets reintroduced to the greater galaxy. But, the funny thing is, with 1,139 vaults of Old Republic credits, they're going to become worthless as soon as At Attin gets exposed to the rest of the galaxy, because there's so many of them. I don't want to say they're going to get reversed. The value is going to crash, is what's going to
Mhm.
happen,
Mhm.
because they're no longer rare. When there's a
Right.
dozen of them out in the galaxy, that's one thing. But when there are billions of them, well, then they're just become way too common. So,
Right.
um,
Exactly. I thought that too.
yeah. So I think that's going to be one of the twists when this is all said and done. That they're being hoarded here. And I would not be terribly surprised if, the Supervisor, whether it's Tack or not, is living like a king because he's been able to isolate this planet from everybody else. And once it's revealed, that goes away.
I could see that.
Yeah.
Wow. So many things that could happen. That's for sure.
Indeed. Well, I can't wait. I'm looking forward to next week. It'll be bittersweet getting the last episode because this has been
It
such a fun ride.
will.
But
Yeah.
they got to
Who
get
is
on making a
directing
second.
next week? Do you know?
I don't. We can look that up real quick, though. Let's see if they
Okay.
tell us. John Watts. So he's
Oh,
directing that one
nice.
himself. Yeah.
Okay. Awesome.
Right. So we got John Watts doing that to wrap it all up. But yeah. Okay. Well, then that does it. That brings us to the end of this discussion of the penultimate episode of season 1 of Skeleton Crew. I'm saying it's season 1 because they got to make another one. And I firmly believe they will. This has been so well received overall by so many
Oh,
people.
yes,
And
it really has.
yeah, and I want to thank all of our listeners for joining us for this discussion. And if you're a brand new listener, thanks for checking us out. And we invite you to subscribe to the podcast wherever it is that you listen to your podcasts. Rate, review if you've done so. That helps us out a lot. Again, we look forward to having you back for our discussion of the season finale. And once you've checked that out, if you want to kind of get into some of our back history of the show, head over to directorsapp.com. You can find the entire catalog of shows that we've got, including all previous 832 episodes, covering various movies, the other series that have been on Disney Plus. We've covered them all here on the show. And we've got a lot of other fun content that's out there. And while you're there, you can check out the other shows that are on the network, covering everything from Marvel to Star Trek, animation, Dune, and so much more. There's a lot of great stuff on the Retro Zap Podcast Network. Jay, remind everybody one more time what our social media contacts are and where else we can be located on the internet.
You got it. We are on Facebook and Instagram at Podcast Stardust. And we do have our Pinterest boards where you can look up all kinds of fun things devoted to Star Wars, of course. And then we also have our 2 YouTube outlets. So we have our YouTube Music as well as the traditional YouTube outlet as well. So head on over to both of those and share those out with your friends because we love to see as much traffic as possible. We're still trying to work on that plaque. We'll see if we ever get it. And if you're up for some real-time chatter, you can hit up the link for that in our show notes, and that'll take you to our Discord room. And while you're there, you can check out all the other Discord rooms for the other Retro Zap shows that Dennis was just running down. And then one last link in our show notes is to our TeePublic store. And there you will find all kinds of fun Podcast Stardust swag, from t-shirts and sweatshirts to coffee mugs and home goods and a whole lot more. And all of those purchases do help to support the show. So we would really appreciate that. And if you do happen to get something, make sure you snap a picture of it and tag us so we can see where it is out in the wild.
All right. Jay, what's going on in the world of cosplay?
All right. Well, you can always catch me on my Instagram, which is at j.snipscosplay. So I'm working on some new things for 2025. I was just featured by Cosplayer Over 40 in a really special post. And so you can check that one out. And you can always catch me as Ahsoka, the Fourth Sister, which I realized I had not dressed as Fourth Sister at all in 2024, which is crazy. So
Wow.
that's going to change. I know. It flabbergasted me when I was going through posts. But at any rate, so she's coming back. And then I also have my 2 different versions of Hera, as well as my original concept Mandalorian, and some other fun things as well. So once again, check that out at j.snipscosplay.
All right. Upcoming on the show on Monday, it is our latest look at Star Wars news. And then on Wednesday, we are kicking off our year-long series discussing Revenge of the Sith for its 20th anniversary. So make sure you join us for that. It's going to be a lot of fun. And with that, just want to thank you all for listening to episode 833 of Podcast Stardust. Have a great weekend. And until next time, may the Force be with you.